This is Beyond the Business.
I kept thinking about fuel after the last episode. Once extraction is done and fuel has been transformed into something usable, it feels like the process is complete. In reality, there is another step that sits quietly in between production and use. Fuel doesn't move straight from refinery into an engine. It waits, sometimes for days, sometimes months, years. It waits in tanks, terminals, storage places, ports like pipelines, and strategic reserves. This part of the system is rarely discussed because it looks passive at the background. Nothing is being produced here, nothing is being refined. But storage is not just a pause. It is an active layer of the energy system with its own costs, risks, and constraints. Keeping fuel available at the right place and at the right time requires infrastructure, energy, maintenance, and constant monitoring. Losses happen, leaks happen, pressure has to be managed, safety has to be maintained. All of this exists before fuel is ever used. Most people only meet fuel at the very end of the chain, at the pump, at the power plant, or industrial site. Everything that happens before that moment remains invisible, even though its cost is already included in the price. So today I want to look at the next step in the fuel chain: storage. Oil, gas, and coal. Not as a technical footnote, but as a structural part of how energy actually works. So let's start with the oil. Oil storage is not a single place. It is a chain of locations spread across the entire energy system. And at the top of this chain are large storage hubs: coastal terminals, port reservoirs, strategic reserves, tank farms near refineries. The biggest concentrations are located where shipping routes: the US Gulf Coast, Rotterdam, Singapore. These locations exist to buffer flow and not to create the value. Below that level, storage continues along pipelines, inland depots, distribution terminals, and regional facilities. Oil moves, stops, waits, and moves again. Each pause requires infrastructure and pumps and monitoring systems and safety systems, in some cases, heating or circulation to keep products usable. At the very end of the chain, storage becomes invisible. Fuel depots near cities, underground tanks, gas stations. What looks like simple availability is in fact the last layer of a long storage architecture that starts thousands of kilometers away. Once you look at storage as a system rather than as a tank, the picture changes. Oil does not just sit, it is constantly managed. Heavy products require temperature control. Light products require vapor management. Tanks must be circulated, inspected, and kept within operating limits. This means continuous energy use while the fuel is not being consumed for anything productive. Storage, therefore, consumes energy without delivering energy. Environmental impact exists at every level. Large reservoirs carry risks of leaks, soil contamination, and groundwater exposure. Smaller facilities contribute, though, cumulative losses, maintenance waste, and long term land use. These effects are usually treated as a local and manageable, but they scale with the size and duration of the storage. Another important point is growth. Storage capacities does not stay fixed. It expands when the system becomes more volatile. Supply disruptions, geopolitical uncertainty, transport bottlenecks, and strategic stockpiling all push the system toward holding more fuel for longer periods. But storage does not increase availability. Oil is not replenished once it is used. Storage only delays use. It shifts timing, and at every additional storage facility adds infrastructure load, energy consumption, and environmental exposure to the system. Part of this storage is not purely commercial. Strategic reserves, national stockpiles, and security driven storage are often supported by public infrastructure and public funding. Even when facilities are operated by private companies, the energy grids, safety systems, and environmental risks are shared. This means that oil storage is not neutral. It is not just a logistical step. It is a structural cost of keeping the fuel system stable under uncertainty. Fuel is already extracted, already refined, already paid for, and yet more energy is spent just to keep it waiting. That is what storage adds to oil. Let's talk about the gas. Gas storage works very differently from oil, and that difference matters. Oil can sit in a tank, gas cannot. It has to be contained under pressure, has to be cooled, compressed, or converted into another state. Storage for gas is therefore not passive, it is always active. There are several main forms of gas storage, like underground storage, in depleted gas fields or salt caverns, above ground pressure vessels near industrial hubs, LNG storage, where gas is cooled, liquefied, stored, shaped, and then turned back into gas again. Each of these options exists because gas cannot simply wait on its own. Underground storage is often presented as efficient, but it still requires compression, monitoring, and constant pressure management. And gas has to be injected and withdrawn using energy. Compressors run continuously. Losses occur during injection, storage, and extraction. Methane leakage, even at low rates, becomes significant at scale. LNG storage adds another layer. Gas is cooled to extremely low temperatures, kept cold, transported, and stored in cryogenic tanks. During storage, boil of gas is unavoidable. That gas must be captured, reused, or burned. All of this consumes energy before the fuel ever reaches a consumer. Storage is also tightly linked to infrastructure. Gas storage facilities are connected to pipelines, compressor stations, power grids, ports, and safety systems. They rely on continuous electricity supply. They rely on redundancy. They rely on emergency response capacity. Even when demand is low, the system must remain fully operational. Environmental impact is not limited to accidents. Methane leakage is a constant concern. Unlike oil spills, gas losses are often invisible. They don't leave stains or pools. They escape into the atmosphere, where their impact is delayed but powerful. Storage turns gas into a long term emission risk, not just a point of use issue. Gas storage capacity has expanded significantly in the recent years, not because consumption has become more predictable, but because it has become less so. Seasonal demand swings, geopolitical disruptions, supply insecurity. Storage absorbs volatility that the system cannot resolve elsewhere. But this buffering has a cost. More storage means more compression, more cooling, more infrastructure, more energy spent to keep gas ready rather than used. As with oil, part of this storage is strategic. National reserves and security driven facilities are built to protect supply rather than to optimize efficiency. These facilities are often supported through public infrastructure and public funding, even when operated by private companies. Once again, society carries part of the burden through energy consumption, through infrastructure load, and environmental exposure. Gas storage is often described as flexibility. In reality, it is another layer of energy spent to manage uncertainty. The fuel exists, the energy is there, but more energy is used just to keep gas contained, stable, and available. That is what storage adds to gas. And let's talk about coal. Coal storage looks simple, but it carries some of the heaviest consequences in the system. Unlike oil or gas, coal does not need pressure or cooling. It can be piled, stacked, and left in the open. That simplicity is often used as an argument in its favor, but storage does not mean neutrality. Coal is stored at mines, ports, and along transport routes. Large open stockpiles exist near rail hubs, terminals, industrial sites. These piles are not temporary. In many regions, coal sits for months or years before it is used. Storage requires space. Large areas of land are occupied permanently. Drainage systems must be installed. Dust suppression systems operate continuously, if existent one. Water is sprayed to reduce airborne particles. That water becomes contaminated runoff. Environmental impact is a constant. Coal dust spreads into surrounding areas. Fine particles enter air and water systems. Rainwater passing through coal stockpiles carries heavy metals and sulfur compounds into soil and groundwater. These effects are not rare events. They are part of normal operation. Coal storage also creates fire risk. Large piles can self-heat and ignite internally. To prevent this, piles must be monitored, reshaped, compacted, or cooled. Equipment runs, energy is used. Again, fuel consumes resources while waiting. Transport adds another layer. Coal is stored between rail movements, port loading, and final delivery. Each pause increases handling. Each handling increases losses. Material is degraded, broken down, or dispersed into the environment. As with oil and gas, part of coal storage exists for security and buffering. Power plants hold reserves to ensure uninterrupted operation. Strategic stockpiles are maintained to protect against supply disruptions. These reserves are not optimized for efficiency, they are designed for endurance. Coal storage therefore externalizes its costs quietly. Local communities absorb air quality impacts. Water systems carry contamination downstream. Land remains degraded long after storage ends. These costs are rarely reflected in the price of coal itself. Coal may be solid, but its storage spreads impact continuously. The fuel waits, the system works around it, and the environment absorbs the side effects. That is what storage adds to coal. And now let's talk about the cost of energy storage directly. Not in abstract terms, but in practical one. Storage is not free, and it is not neutral. First, there is the cost of redundancy. Fuel is stored not only because it is needed today, but because the system is built to hold more than it consumes. Strategic reserves, spare capacity, backup tanks. This fuel may never be used, but the infrastructure around it still has to exist. Second, there is the cost of readiness. Storage facilities cannot simply sit idle. Pumps, monitoring systems, temperature control, safety equipment, security personnel, etc. Energy is consumed even when nothing moves. Storage works by staying active all the time. Third, there is the cost of infrastructure. Storage is embedded into ports, terminals, pipelines, refineries, and urban supply systems. Someone has to build it, maintain it, and ensure it, and keep it compliant. Whether this infrastructure is privately owned or state backed, its costs is real and ongoing. Fourth, There is the cost of risk buffering. Storage exists because the system cannot accept interruptions. Instead of flexibility, it relies on the backup. That buffer is expensive to maintain even when it is not used. And this leads to the key point. None of these costs are abstract. They are not paid by the system as an idea. They are paid by end users, by industries that buy fuel, by transport, by agriculture, by households. Storage is not a separate layer outside the price of energy. It is already inside it. Every liter sold includes the cost of being stored, kept ready, and protected from uncertainty. Fuel storage is also a risk. A real, physical, long term risk that exists the moment fuel is placed somewhere and left there. Large storage facilities are not abstract points on a map. They sit in a very specific locations like ports, coastal zones, river deltas, industrial hubs. Rotterdam, Antwerp, Hamburg, Le Havre, places where storage was built for efficiency and access, not because they were environmentally neutral. These locations made sense economically. They still do, but they also concentrate risk. Storage is usually treated as a technical issue: tanks, containment, inspections, maintenance, schedules. From an operational point of view, that logic looks complete. From a systemic point of view, it isn't. The first problem is time. Storage infrastructure is built to last decades. Risk frameworks, contracts, and insurance cycles are not. Equipment ages, materials fatigue, corrosion happens slowly and then suddenly. Climate conditions around these sites are no longer stable. Sea levels rise, storm intensity increases, flood patterns shift. What used to be a low probability scenario becomes part of normal operating conditions. The second problem is location. Many of the world's largest storage hubs sit next to water. That was never accidental. Fuel moves by ship. Ports matter. But water also means that a failure does not stay local. A leak into soil is bad. A leak into river or the sea is irreversible at scale. Containment plans exist, response procedures exist, but once fuel enters an open ecosystem, control is already lost. Cleanup manages damage, it does not undo it. There have been enough storage related spills globally to know this is not a theory. Tanks fail, pipelines rupture near terminals, containment systems designed for past conditions face stresses they were never built for. These events are not constant, but they are persistent, and their impact lasts far longer than the incident report. This leads to the deeper issue: how risk is actually defined. Most risk management around fuel storage is built around insurability. Probability is assessed, financial exposure is calculated, and coverage is arranged. From the company's perspective, the risk is managed. But what is being managed is the balance sheet, not the consequence. Insurance can compensate loss. It cannot restore ecosystems. It cannot clean groundwater back to its original state. It cannot remove long term health impacts from nearby communities. These consequences don't sit on the corporate balance sheet, they sit in the environmental and in public systems. This creates a structural mismatch. The entity that stores the fuel manages the financial risk of failure. The consequences of failure are absorbed elsewhere by ecosystems, public infrastructure, and society over the time. Risk is localized in accounting, impact is distributed in reality. And this is where existing risk frameworks quietly fail. They are still built around historical data, stable conditions, and isolated events. They are not designed for cascading effects, long duration damage, or climate amplified consequences. The world has changed faster than the frameworks used to manage it. What matters here is not intent. Storage operators follow regulations, audits are performed, standards exist. The problem is architectural. Risk management remains focused on preventing losses, not on owing consequences. Fuel storage in this sense is not just an operational step between refinery and consumer. It is a long-term environmental commitment. Once fuel is stored, its risk does not disappear when contracts expire or facilities change hands. It stays embedded in the location. This is the blind spot. Storage is treated as neutral infrastructure. In reality, it is a persistent source of systemic risk. The fuel may be privately owned, but the risk never fully is. And at last, fuel does not end at extraction or refining. It does not end at storage either. Each stage exists because the system needs it to keep working. But each stage also adds weight, energy, cost, risk, and long term consequences that rarely stay where decisions are made. Storage is usually invisible to the consumer, and it feels like a technical detail somewhere between production and use. In reality, it is structural commitment. It locks fuel into locations, ties risk to infrastructure, and spreads consequences across society when something goes wrong. Nothing here is accidental. The system works exactly as it was designed to work. The question is whether it was designed to carry the consequences it now creates.